before I start, I would like to say that, as was mentioned, this is not just my sole doing. It's a collaboration with the Czech National Corpus Institute, with a colleague of mine, Professor Václav Cvrček. And this collaboration goes way back to 2011, and it became the catalyst for the current multidisciplinary Brown-Charles MOU. I actually found out about really sort of nice, very nice things about large language data and learning how to use them. And it changed my research life completely. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. So this is the roadmap that I'm going to follow. I will try to nail down morphemes and why they are impoverished, and what impoverished morphemes do. This is our claim, and I will have to talk about a little bit about the method and the theoretical underpinnings too. Then I'll go to the texts, talk about the texts that are used, the language, the really big language corpora that are being used, and results, illustrative examples on two types of impoverished morphemes, derivational morphemes and inflectional morphemes. And I'll end with conclusions. So what are morphemes? I think many of you already know this, but I just wanted to be on the same page. A morpheme is a minimal indivisible unit in a language, and it comes in two kinds, free versus bound. So if you have a sentence like birds perched in the trees, the birds is a word form. It's a word form. It contains a morpheme bird and an s to indicate grammatical number. Similarly, with the trees, also tree and s. And perched is a word form, a conjugated form, and perch is a dictionary entry. It's a morpheme, but it's a different kind of morpheme. And ed is the tense marker. It's a grammatical morpheme. A morpheme can be used to create other parts of speech. So from the verb sing, you can produce singer. From a verb to a noun, an individual who sings. So, so those morphemes that are standalone morphemes, like bird and perch and tree, these are they're not bound morphemes. They are not impoverished morphemes. They can stand on their own, but bound morphemes cannot stand on their own, and they mark grammatical functions or parts of speech, and they're considered to be semantically bleached. So I call them impoverished morphemes because, based on some experience, an anecdotal experience, a colleague who is a linguist, a colleague's colleague told her graduate students that something like, we deal with big ideas, we deal with ideas, but we don't deal with dirty morphemes. So I thought, okay, well, dirty morpheme is not really good because it will be opposed to clean morphemes. And what is a clean morpheme? It doesn't tell me anything. But I thought that what this colleague sort of meant was that probably a morpheme does not contribute to the meaning of a text. So I kind of called it impoverished morphemes. So what do impoverished morphemes do? Our claim is that they can point to a larger political narrative. And a political, we use this in the sense of marking power relationships, so it's wider. Bound and apparently semantically impoverished morphemes tell us about two things: how speakers package information for political purposes, to mark power relationships, and then they also point to an underlying political stance, sort of like it creates this kind of hyper story that it's an undercurrent that emerges from a larger number of texts. So we will look at two types of impoverished morphemes: derivational, parts of speak making, and inflectional morphemes, grammar marking morphemes. So the examples are from Czech. I will give you only translations into English, but this concept is applicable to other languages, so please don't tune out. Okay, so a couple of words about the method. The starting point is the Corpus linguistic method of keyword analysis by Scott and Tribble. Keyword analysis. Well, what are keywords? Keywords are not cultural words. They are in this sense. Their keywords are extracted, so they're results. And they're usually unusually frequent words in a text. And so they're called prominent words, surprisal words, unexpected words, and they are loosely tied to topic of a text. So what does keyword analysis do? It compares word frequencies in the target text, which is the target text is the text that you want to analyze, against the background of a much larger reference corpus. Usually a reference corpus of this type, it represents general language use. I will talk about this a little later about the data. So this is keyword analysis, and that's actually commonly used in corpus linguistics. What I'm going to show you is the extension, another sort of extended strand of keyword analysis, and we call it key morph analysis. And it looks at unusually frequent bound morphemes, impoverished morphemes in the target corpus. Morphemes that make parts of speech, and also in this presentation we will focus on grammatical case endings for specific lexical items. A little bit about the theoretical underpinning. I actually sort of present this with a lot of assumptions, but I think the assumptions are correct. We use cognitive linguistic view of grammar. That means that parts of speech are semantically definable, as mentioned by and argued by Langaker, 87 and 2008. For specifically Slavic materials, I use Yanda 93, Yanda and Clancy 2006, particularly in relation to grammatical case marking and its meaning. So texts. There are two kinds of text that I'm going to show you, or text sort of samples of text. And one set of data, it comes from so-called speeches. And this contains about 250,000 tokens containing Czechoslovak and Czech presidential addresses. Tokens, that means that words plus punctuation marks. This is one set of data. And the other set of data is called the Sputnik, Czech Republic, SPU-CZ. And these are texts containing some seed words, Russia-related, Ukraine-related, and Belarus-related. These texts come from this web portal, Sputnik News, from March through June of 2015. So it's not really, this is not really about the current situation, but what you will see is probably would serve as an underlying kind of stance that is very consistent even now in the official Kremlin kind of ideology, I'm hoping. So this corpus contains about 395,000 tokens. So these are the target texts that I'm going to show you, and they are compared against the reference corpus, which is much bigger, and it has about 100 million word representative, 100 million words, and it reflects the majority of language variation, written, public, and printed discourse, public and prepared speech. This is the reference corpus. So I would like to get to the actual part of the data and the results. So I'll talk about derivational morphemes, part of speech forming morphemes first, and I'll be using the Czechoslovak presidential speeches, that corpus, the first one. So what we are going to look at is the distribution of nouns and verbs, and I would like you to take a look at this. This one this example is taken from Gottwald 1948. This is the first communist president of Czechoslovakia. And you probably noticed that it's rife with nouns. It's a nouny text. So this is an interesting feature, and I'm going to talk about this. It's a very sort of like pervasive in communist presidents' speeches in general. Before I forget, so the most prototypical nouns that are of interest are, of course, nominalization of events like strengthening and consolidation, but there are others like independence and freedom. It has to be, also has to be national freedom or socialist freedom or socialist democracies. But what are they? What are they? What is involved? What kind of democracy? We don't know, and who are participating and who are free. It's not clear. If you look at Havel here, 1b, this actually is very different from Gottwald's speech. You notice that it's rife with finite verb forms. In Czech, you don't see pronouns, but by looking at the verb forms, you can see who is doing what. And so the social actors are very clear. You as the citizens of the audience, and I as president. And the verbs can be marked with modality like should and can, and tense like will. And also the act of thinking is presented as a process. It's not a sort of like a thing, thinking, it's a process. And the verb promise, you don't see this here, but it's in the perfective aspect. That means it's completely promise rather than repeatedly saying he will do something. That would be in the imperfective aspect. So you see that there are like nouny speeches and verby speeches here. And if you look at it in a sort of a large scale results, you see this immediately, that there are large sort of striking differences between the communist presidents and post-communist presidents. The numbers indicate the degrees of prominence. It's called difference index. And the abbreviations, these are all names of the presidents. And the red indicates communist presidents and blue post-communist presidents. So you notice that the nouns are very prominent among communist presidents, whereas the post-communist presidents' speeches are marked more or less with verbs, verbs being prominent. And you might have a question about this. I think I anticipate that there's a question, because verbs can be an infinitive form, and the infinitive form would not mark any social actors. So I would like to show you further this picture, a more microscopic view, the prominence of finite verb forms, conjugated forms, and nouns. So here you see the first row is the verb finite forms, and the communist leaders are mostly sort of very, very low in prominence for verb finite forms. And they're consistently strong and prominent in the noun side. as opposed to post-communist presidents, post-communist presidents are very prominent in terms of verb finite forms. Václav Havel, Václav Klaus, and Miloš Zeman. Okay. So what does all indicate? Derivational morphemes in large corpus data, they tell us something about the type of discourse. Noun-y speeches reify events, reify states, and we don't know what the event participants are, who is responsible for the action, who is affected. And what kind of properties does an event have? Is it a process? Is it a result? What are we looking at? Where was the event situated in time? Is it a specific sort of time span? Is it a hypothetical space? We don't know. And so without very clear social actors, the social actors are not empowered in these speeches. Verby speeches are clearer in responsibility, who is responsible. There's more articulation of personal responsibility. There's tense, aspect. Is it considered to be represented as a result? Was it unexpected, expected? Was it a process without results? Was it being sort of like a process and people were trying to do something, but they didn't sort of manage to bring any results? That these things will be very clear. And so in verby speeches, social actors are more empowered. I'm talking about the relative sort of relative prominence, so comparing the nouniness and verbiness in these speeches. Okay, so these are the derivational morphemes, and I would like to talk a little bit about inflectional morphemes. Those are the morphemes that indicate grammatical case. So before showing you some fragments of the data, I would like to say something about what traditional linguists say and what cognitive linguists say about case and semantics. So the nominative case is likely to be the responsible entity in most sentences. And the instrumental case tends to denote accessory to something else. And in Czech, it's very much tied with the preposition with. The dative case is very interesting in Czech. It indicates beneficiary, experiencer, or victim. Basically, the dative case kind of marks the passive role of the individual. Also as a competitor, meaning that it can be combined with the preposition against. So a target of attack or victim that you will see in Sputnik corpus a lot. The accusative case, you probably know that it's mostly direct object, but it's a destination or dimension where force is applied. And lastly, the genitive case brings an entity to the background. We don't know whether the entity is the subject of an action. We don't know whether it's a direct object of an action. It can be just a modifier, specification of some sort of noun, preceding noun. We don't know. So it's very an ambiguous entity. It denotes ambiguous agency. So when you look at the relative prominence between cases within the same lexical item, we can kind of look at the political stances. You will see that some sort of like a general sort of ideological stance will come out. So let's take a look at the words Russia, Ukraine, and West. So what you see in Sputnik is the word Russia being very prominent in the dative case, predominantly used against Russia or a victim. We can't ignore that the word Russia occurs in the instrumental case with prepositions with or between as a negotiation partner. You see this here as an example, sanctions against Russia. This is very commonly used, a very frequently sort of used chunk. And confrontation between the EU and Russia, the instrumental case. So negotiator, partner, legitimate partner, that's the kind of role that the word Russia occurs in. The word West is prominent in the instrumental case. So it tends to be used with the preposition with, between, relationship, so as a partner. Less prominent, but still is positively prominent are the nominative and genitive, like the sanctions of the West, by meaning in English would be the sanctions by West. So the first example would say the relations with the West, or the West started an information war on Twitter, or sanctions of the West. The word Ukraine, in contrast, is prominent in the nominative and genitive, but you will see that it's very different from you will see that it will be different from different configuration between the Ukraine and Ukrainian president later on. But here the Ukraine is prominent in the nominative and genitive. So Ukraine is selling off Polish humanitarian aid. The situation in eastern Ukraine. This is a sort of specification of a location. So I have to bother you with the tables. This is what we see. Russia tends to occur in the dative case. It's very strongly, sort of prominently, sort of represented as a victim, and as a partner, almost equally so. West is very weakly represented as some patient of an action. It is strong in the as an instrumental case and as a partner. And you see that the nominative and genitive are also moderately prominent. Ukraine, which is very interesting about Ukraine, the word Ukraine, is that it doesn't have prominence at all in the instrumental case. So it's not regarded as a real partner. But it has some agency, and but it's very ambiguous. Its role is ambiguous and represented in the genitive case. Usually, it's a location, not even a sort of demoted subject. So what you see is the Russia being a partner. Others are against it. West is a partner, but the force is not applied to the West. West is not affected. Ukraine is not a partner. Is moderately agentive and often in the background. And when you think about these states in terms of keymorph prominence and compare the prominence with other sort of presidential terms like Putin, Poroshenko, and Obama, you will come up with some sort of a very overarching story. So Poroshenko, that the Ukrainian president at that time, 2015, is predominantly appearing in the dative case, passive recipient and experiencer. Here you have to go into the concordances in real text, and you don't see the against. You actually sort of see Poroshenko as a receiver, not even a competitor, a receiver. The word Obama appears in the instrumental case predominantly, and predominantly with the preposition with. It's a partnership. And this is an interesting example. As you see, the Russian Federation, Putin explained the situation in a conversation with his American colleague, Barack Obama. So it's an American colleague, Putin talks with him, but Putin is the one who is explaining the situation. And you'll see this here. Putin is actually prominent in the nominative case. The word has a lot of agency. And Putin appears with conjunction with verbs like said, announced, proclaimed, and emphasized. Okay, and so here are the numbers. Putin is strong with agency, far from being a recipient. You see that the dative case is very, very weak in prominence. Obama appears and represented as a partner in the instrumental case, but it's not strong in agency. Poroshenko is represented as playing a passive role in the dative case and far, far from a real partner. So when we put all these things together, you can actually sort of construct an underlying story. On the left-hand side, you have the state. On the right-hand side, you have the leader, political leaders. And so starting from the West is represented as a partner, and it's agentive, whereas Obama is represented as a partner, but not really agentive. So Obama is not really sort of a fit is represented as a fit leader. It's not represented as a good sort of like leader. And Russia, on the other hand, the state is represented as a victim and negotiation partner. And Putin is more agentive than a partner. So Russia being a victim needs an agentive leader. And so if you combine these two things together, you actually sort of see that Putin is actually presented as like a justified leader in a way. In this kind of multitude of texts, you have this kind of grammatical case marking that would indicate Putin is a fit leader. Russia as a victim really needs a strong leader like Putin. Ukraine is agentive, and at the same time, its role is really ambiguous. If you think about Ukraine, the state as sort of agentive or moderately agentive, and at the same time, the leader is not really agentive, and it's not even a partner, but it's only Poroshenko is an experiencer. You kind of like you can actually sort of arrive at an interpretation that, okay, well, Poroshenko is not a fit leader, a weak leadership. So here we can actually sort of see that there are implicit sort of narratives that you can sort of extract from a multitude of texts. So to summarize, I wanted to actually show you just a little bit of how small units in language can actually be very useful in understanding a multitude of texts, and the advantage of large text data to prove a hyper story, overarching story in a multitude of texts. The impoverished morphemes indicate type of political discourse and underlying conceptualization. And I wanted to say that a morpheme is an abstraction, not a surface form. And at the same time, I would like to sort of emphasize that impoverished morphemes are expected to be applicable to other languages. So these are references, acknowledgements, and thank you for your attention.